I'm sure we have a global audience today, so I would just want to give a little bit of time, a couple more minutes for everyone to join us. Um, Please, we like our webinars to be interactive, so feel free to put your questions or concerns, anything in the chat. It's 9:01 a.m. Pacific time. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. So I don't know where you guys, if you guys can put in chat where you're joining us from, that would be great while we're waiting for others. And Jai, it's a safe space. All right, so North America. Hello from Mauritius. Do we have anybody from UK? Because I know we all also open it to. Oh, amazing. Hello. London, Malawi. Philippines, Mauritius, Canada, Texas. Howdy. Amazing. Dubai. All right, so we're 3 minutes in. Um, I am going to jump in and get started, and we will have the recording of the webinar available for anybody who wasn't able to join us. So without further ado, my name is Caroline Raffi. I'm the VP of Enterprise with Ducere Global Business School. For those of us who are not familiar with us, we're a global university group with offices in 5 continents, delivering bachelor's and master's degrees. Our core mission is to break down all barriers to education, to provide access to everyone, everywhere, whether it's time, whether it's cost, whether it is entry criteria that is being challenged. Our vision is to design and deliver the world's most industry applied university degrees that advance student careers. We are here today. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Rachel Vanderkrijt. Dr. Vanderkrijt is a director of psychology and implementation research and a staff psychologist at the Center for Women's Mental Health at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's also an assistant professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School. I'm reading this because I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. With a PhD in clinical psychology and a master's in public health from Harvard, Dr. Vanderkirk brings deep expertise in evidence-based therapies and implementation research. She spent over a decade consulting with the World Health Organization, and her work centers on advancing women's mental health, particularly during critical life transitions like pregnancy, postpartum, and adolescence. Now, her passion for making mental health care more accessible through digital tool and integrated care and peer delivering aligns beautifully with our mission at Ducere to support a holistic career aligned growth. So that's why I'm again very excited to have you here. Thank you so much for accepting our invite. Because we know, I mean, this month specifically, it's mental health awareness, but it's something that is very near and dear to my heart. I think I'm really excited that um, we have you on. We've had, other specialists on previously because we talk about career progression all day, every day. We talk about education all day, every day. However, we know that it's not just, it has to be from inside out, and there's so many other um, things that add to, career progression, self-growth, education, or whatnot. So I would love to hand it to you, Dr. Van der Kuyk, and get started.
Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I've loved to learn more about, your school and program, and really appreciate the spotlight on mental health and learning. Um, so as you shared in my bio, I'm a clinical psychologist, and a lot of my training in terms of how to promote mental health and well-being is embedded in what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, or the CBT model. And so I thought it would be helpful to kind of start this discussion and conversation to overview what this model is and what it means. And then we can think about, how education and learning fits into this model, so that we can see a little bit about how it can promote, mental health and well-being, and what are some other considerations. And apologies, I do have a dog. He'll stop barking in a minute. Um, what other considerations to keep in mind to help learners in their education path. But so to
Amazing.
start, and any questions before I dive into the model? Mhm.
Not from me. No, we're all ears.
Okay, great. So when we think about how to support mental health and well-being, there are a lot of different approaches. Mental health can be impacted by our biology, so different hormone levels and such. And sometimes people with more severe, mental illness, they may want to or need and benefit from medications and such. But there's a lot of research on how our behaviors, so what we do, the way we think, can be impacted and changed, and we can work on kind of how our, the way that we think and behave to impact our mental health and well-being. And so there's something, there's an approach called evidence-based psychotherapy, meaning there are different types of interventions or therapies for mental health that have a strong evidence, in research that these types of services can impact and improve mental health and well-being. So CBT, many of you might have heard of it, but it's one type of evidence-based therapy. And we know that this type of therapy and skills, CBT skills, can improve mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, and overall kind of stress and well-being. And what is essentially at the core of this model is this idea that the way that we think, so our thoughts, and in a given situation, let's say you were a student, let's say we're a working parent, we're going throughout our days and our minds are constantly giving us a narrative, right? We're constantly interpreting what's going around us, what people, are thinking and such. And so we don't often pay attention to what our thoughts are. But that's a very important step to think about how we are thinking. And so that's one component, our thoughts, our cognitions. Another component, that we think about are our behaviors, what we do or what we don't do. So in terms of our behaviors, they could be things like our physical activity level. Do we go for walks? Do we enjoy being outside in nature? Do we socialize and see people? Do we go to class? What behaviors are we doing? Or, are we avoiding? Are we staying inside? Are we not engaging in things that may challenge us or push us to improve? So, here we have those two buckets, our thoughts and our behaviors. And what's important is how they connect to our feelings. So the way, we feel in our body, maybe, and emotions can often come up. We can feel sadness, we can feel anxiety, we can feel joy, we can feel contentment, we can feel anger, so our feelings are kind of our emotions, but also our feelings in our body. So if we're feeling anxious, maybe we have kind of jitters or butterflies, or maybe our hands feel a little clammy, or our heart starts to race. So those are all kind of our feelings. And so what's important in this model is that they all connect together, right? So the way we think may affect the way we feel and what we do or what we don't do. Or our behaviors, may impact the way we think and how we feel. And what can happen is sometimes people can get stuck in these cycles of behaviors, thinking, and feelings that don't serve them very well, and may contribute to anxiety or difficulty managing stress or depression. And so it's really important to think about how we notice what's going on for ourselves in these buckets, the way we're thinking, how we're spending our time, what we're doing, and how we're feeling. And to notice, if we are stuck in any cycle, how to break out of that, how to learn some skills and tools to improve mental health and well-being. And that's where I would advocate for today that learning and education can be a great opportunity to improve these buckets. And we can talk a little bit about that. Mhm.
So, um, that's great, but what would think, how do I know? How do you keep track of your thoughts? Because you behave the way you behave, you feel the way you feel, right? How do you stay on top of that, or how do you monitor yourself to, because it's one thing to know, and then after that will come a question of how do you, once you um accept certain facts about yourself,
Yeah.
right? How do you overcome it?
Yeah.
How do you help yourself help yourself?
Exactly. So I think that's a great question. That's actually one of the first steps we do, as psychologists and CBT is what's called awareness or monitoring. So let's say, we notice maybe you're pursuing kind of a degree, or you have aspirations to kind of go back to school, or, take a class that's really challenging. You may notice that you feel some anxiety. So we would ask you first, okay, when you notice you're feeling some anxiety or discomfort, what is going through your mind at that point? Are you having thoughts like, I can't do this, or this is too much, or I won't be able to manage, right? Is that the way that you're talking to yourself? Are those the nature of the thoughts? And if that's the case, we would work to think about how helpful are, what's the impact of engaging in those types of thoughts? It's really important to realize we actually have more control over our thoughts than we realize. So if we are having very negative or very critical self-talk, it's important to have that awareness of that and to think about what's the impact of those thoughts on how I'm feeling or what I'm doing. Are those thoughts helping me stay motivated and do my homework or reach out to the professor for help and ask questions? Or are those thoughts causing me to say, what's the point? Or I'm not good enough to do this. And then you can lose motivation. So it's really that question is really important, Caroline, because the first step is to have more of awareness of the way we are thinking, of the way we are talking to ourselves. And then once you have that awareness, you then have a little bit more opportunity to shift or to change some of those components.
So you're kind of reverse engineering yourself.
A
You're
little.
starting from bottom up. I'm feeling this way, and then you work backwards to see what is causing it and everything that you just mentioned.
Exactly. So the first step is to kind of understand, what is going on for you in those three areas, and are those patterns serving you to meet your goals, your values, or not? And if not, there's an opportunity to learn, some different strategies. Yeah.
Great. So
Mhm.
you also mentioned that, well, if you're feeling anxious about learning something new or going back to school, why is it making me feel anxious? Does it also work? How do you think if learning can actually I'm going to ask the question the other way. What does learning, if it eases anxiety or depression, is there any research that shows that actually putting yourself in that position, we're learning something new, whether it is getting a degree or whether it is learning to paint or play the piano. How does it affect you if it does?
Yeah.
And does it, help with anxiety, depression, or anything else that I'm not mentioning right aware?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And so, yes, there's a lot of research, in neuroscience and such, showing that continuous learning is good for the brain. It protects the brain in terms of our cognitions, and it often can contribute to feelings of self-efficacy, making us feel better about ourselves, that can improve mental health and well-being. And let's think about what learning does in those three areas and why it might be helpful for mental health. So, if you're engaging in some type of learning, whether it is, to your point, it could be just learning a new skill, a new hobby, a class, in the cognitive bucket, it can help to feed positive thoughts about yourself, right? Oh, I'm able to learn this. I'm developing a new skill. You're able to think often a little bit more positively about your ability to learn. So it can impact you cognitively in that kind of area and the thoughts that you're having about what you are capable of. And maybe how you identify and kind of who you are. So certainly it can be helpful there. Very importantly, in the behavioral kind of bucket. So we know there's a lot of research that to improve mood and well-being, doing activities that give us some sense of pleasure, some sense of accomplishment or mastery, or some sense of being connected to our values or what's important to us, impact our mood and well-being and help our mental health. So learning often does all of that from a behavioral perspective. It's an opportunity for us to engage, with maybe new content, learning new skills that we know novelty and that kind of new skill development helps to give us a boost in mood and well-being. Sometimes, especially if learning is in line with our values. Maybe we value education, maybe we value being informed, about things going on in the world. Learning can then connect us to our values, which improves mental health and well-being. And we often can find it enjoyable and fun, especially if it's connecting us with other people, other learners of similar mindsets, so from a behavioral perspective, learning can really help us to stay, connected to activities that give us a sense of purpose, connection to our values, and a sense of mastery or accomplishment. On the feelings side, we talk cognitive, behavioral, and then kind of how we feel. We know that being very present, so present in this current moment, right, is very helpful for our mental health and well-being. If we think about often anxiety is fears of the future, what could happen, what I don't have control over the past, depression with regrets. So we know that any activities that connect us to this present moment and give us a sense of tuning in right now, in this moment, kind of without judgment and such, are helpful. And I would, think oftentimes when we're learning, we are very in the present moment, right? When you're in a class, you're really focused on what's going on or if as best as you can, stay tuned and focused, in the present moment. And so that aspect of how learning can give an opportunity for mindfulness, of being kind of just very present, focused, we know is impactful and helpful for mental health. Mm-hmm.
I love that you said that because I was going to say, is that because now there are so many words that are just thrown out there, mindfulness, being about, but
Yes.
what I'm hearing is because you're learning something new, you have no choice but to be present and but to be there. And because you're focused on that, you're not thinking about anything else. And that is what's helping. Is that right?
Exactly. And I love that you bring that up because you're right. There are a lot of different views on what mindfulness is and such, but really what it is being focused, your attention in the present moment, kind of on purpose and without judgment. And so you're absolutely right. When we are learning something new, that's often a very helpful way to stay focused in the present moment. Our minds might pull us away, distract us. Maybe we think, oh, we have to do something later today or run an errand or such. But if you're able to kind of refocus back on what you're learning, what you're reading, what you're listening to, it's a great tool to stay mindful in the present moment, which we know is good for our mental health.
So that's one thing because I'm assuming it will be the same with depression because depression is when you're thinking about the past. So again, when you're focused, you don't have time to go to the past.
Yeah.
But then I also hear, and I'm sorry if this is a stupid question, but we also hear that it's like a muscle. Like if you don't use your muscles, if you don't go to the gym, you're gonna lose muscle mass. Is it the same? Is that how it's helping? And then continue that question, does it matter how much you're learning, the amount of learning, does that matter?
Those are both really great questions. And so for the first one, yes, anything from a, perspective like CBT and such, we always encourage to start small, with goals or practices, to kind of build, whether it's that muscle, and to build a sense of ability, and before you get too ambitious with what the goals are. So with that, yes, there is this idea, especially in mindfulness practice, that it is a practice. It's like building a muscle. It's very hard to sometimes stay focused, when people have such busy lives and so much going on in their lives. It can be really hard sometimes to give yourself permission to focus maybe on what you're learning, or even this conversation right now. I'm sure some people might be multitasking, right, as they're listening to this conversation. It's very normal, and it's hard to sometimes allow yourself to focus just on one thing at a time. And yet there can be a lot of comfort, and ease if you are able to just stay engaged and stay present. But it is a practice. The mind will keep kind of pulling you away elsewhere. And so the practice is to bring it back, the attention back to what you're learning or to whatever you're doing, your activity in the moment. So yes, that is one aspect. It is a practice. It is like growing, a muscle. Many of these mental health skills and even learning is, you're just coming back to it. And to your second question, we do certainly encourage any, if you're trying to learn something new, trying to break it down into small and manageable, steps as possible. And so trying to think about how you can set yourself up for success by breaking things apart, up into little tasks. Once you accomplish that, how can you move on? So you could think about how that might apply for a certain, if you have to do assignments or home practice or different activities, or a lot of reading, how can you, break things up into small bite-sized bits and kind of grow from there.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That also made me think of we actually did so we do a lot of focus on women, especially women in leadership, and mental health challenges that women uniquely face because of pregnancy, and they have to put their job on hold, especially if you're in leadership. You build so much, and now you have to put it on pause. How do you balance work life, and if you now want to study on the side? But men also face a lot of mental health challenges, whether it's as a result of physical, like I know I had a student that he had open heart surgery. He was going through depression, and he started, going through our programs, and that he said that's one of the things that helped him, to your point, to come
Yeah.
out of depression. So considering, regardless of men and women, how can we support them? Because a lot of times, especially I'm thinking with our professional age group, we're all so busy.
Yeah.
We're managing work, life, family, and now you have to learn everything. Now you have it. Now throw AI at it. Now you have to learn this tool, learn that tool.
Yeah.
How can we? How do we support each other or support ourselves in such environment?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think that, flexibility is key and is really important in terms of supporting, the learning process. We can, I think, especially as you're saying, for, women or anyone who's balancing so many aspects of their life, family demands, health concerns, and such, sometimes it can feel overwhelming to learn something new or to add something else on it. And that's understandable, right? And so certainly programs or companies, as best as they can offer, I think flexibility is really important in terms of maybe time frame to complete different lectures, if they can be recorded and such, assignments, that can be maybe a little bit more flexible in terms of the way that they're being completed or conducted. So I think flexibility, is key. I think in terms of helping learners really stay connected to what they're trying to learn. We know from kind of like a motivational perspective, things that feel a little more intrinsic, meaning like there's more meaning to why, you're doing something or learning something that can help you stay motivated, as opposed to, extrinsic motivators of just, oh, well, I'm trying to just check that off, or I'm trying to complete this because, a family member wants to. So how can programs, maybe build in more of that and really feed to learners intrinsic motivation for what they're learning and why they're doing it? Those come to mind in terms of, yeah, leveraging flexibility and intrinsic motivation. Yeah.
Thank you. I love that because also when you're passionate about something, it definitely helps. And then again, because we have a lot of leaders and managers, they're leading teams, leading, starting businesses or leading businesses or whatnot. Um, from what I'm hearing, it doesn't matter what type of learning it is. You might pick up painting. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be some sort of a, I don't know, public speaking, for example, class that you're taking. It could be anything. Is
Yeah.
that what I'm hearing correctly?
Yeah, I think, from in terms of what we learn and our mental health, absolutely, there can be, you can think the way we think about what learning is, I guess, is important because there can be absolutely, creative learning, engaging in arts or hobbies that can provide an opportunity for maybe emotional expression or reduce stress, by activating kind of the creativity there. If it's more academic learning, academic subjects or pursuits that can, enhance, we know like cognitive skills and certain, thinking and maybe and provide more of a sense of achievement, both I think can contribute to the way we identify or the way we think of ourselves, and that can be helpful, whether it's by building up, these creative outlets and hobbies or, through academics or career development. They can, both give us a sense of, accomplishment and purpose. So, and then hands-on learning, and techniques can certainly help us, boost a little more confidence by doing kind of things actively and maybe with other people, in connection to others. And maybe provide more immediate kind of like tangible outcomes. So yes, I think there's a whole range of types of learning, and they all, I think, can offer similar and maybe unique benefits. Mhm.
Thank you. Two more questions, and we're going to open it to the audience for questions. One is, do you think, or how does age play any, has anything to do with the way you're learning or the amount of learning? Does age matter? If yes, how? How do
Yeah.
we, because again, you have people in their 30s, you have people in their 70s. So how does that come to play?
That's a really great question. And I think from someone from, a neuroscience field, maybe we'll have a different answer in terms of, the brain's ability maybe to learn new material and content and such. So there may be some factors, to consider in terms of age and what to learn or how easy it is to learn. From my perspective, I think learning can occur across the entire lifespan. You may, of course, as we age, what's so hard, you mentioned AI, right? Like there are things that, students maybe younger are learning intensely right now that maybe older students are not as familiar with, and there can be a gap, of what we know intimately, as we get older, but as what becomes more available. So I think having some sensitivity to just what may not be as accessible or familiar with some older, students as they learn is good to know. Um, but I think it's really capitalizing that you can learn across the whole life, period is important. And I think in supporting students in what helps them to learn, right, is important. So maybe strategies or kind of support systems to learn new content and in different ways may be helpful. But yeah, I think, learning certainly can occur across the lifespan.
So when someone says, "Oh, I'm too old for that," that's not
That's a
that
great. That's a great example of a cognitive thought, right? So, and that I think that's such a great example, right? If we have these thoughts or cognitions about ourselves, the way we believe about the world, that, oh, I'm too old to learn something new, the impact of that is that made me make me feel kind of low and demotivated. And then behavior, yeah, like I'm probably not going to pursue anything. And there's no real truth to that necessarily. Thoughts are not facts, you know. But if you say that, you're kind of, it does impact the way you behave and what you do. So no, I absolutely agree. Like if you have a more helpful thought of, it may be hard to learn something new, but I can do it. You know, I have the support systems available. That wouldn't change your behaviors and the way you feel. And so, yes, that's a great example of an unhelpful thought, you know, that I'm too old to learn something new. And what I would want to do from a CBT framework is to think about how accurate is that? Is there a more helpful thought, you know, that you can try to tell yourself that could impact the outcomes and your ability to learn something new? Yeah.
I love that. So then next time we want to learn something, or next time we remember the webinar and something is holding us back, we can go back to that graph that you shared
Exactly.
with us and
Yeah.
then see we are blocking ourselves, we're holding ourselves back,
Yeah.
and where are we on that chart?
Yep.
And then work it that way.
Exactly. And that's what, and like this, we probably won't be able to cover all of the different skills, you know, in CBT, but I think what I'd want all of everyone here listening to know that there are in each of those buckets strategies of what you can do to get out of your own way. So exactly, changing your thoughts or coping. It's very common and normal to have some anxiety or difficult emotions, but how, you know, instead of being letting your emotions or feelings determine what you do. Maybe you don't pursue things because you have butterflies or you're too anxious. How can you work with or cope with those emotions to, you know, still pursue what's important to you? So exactly, whenever you notice maybe unhelpful thoughts or behaviors or emotions getting in the way of what you want to do, I'd come back to that triad and think about what's going on here, and maybe what could I do to get out of that cycle. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to open it to our audience. Please feel free to put in your questions in chat. And again, this is a safe place, so there is no wrong or bad or stupid questions. If you want anything for the doctor to point on or help you with, you can put it in the chat. While we're waiting, so then I would say, leaving this webinar today, would you say that it would be a good thing for us to think about purely for our mental health?
Yeah.
Am I learning something new? If not, what am I going to, as if it's vitamins, you know, you have to take your vitamins every day.
Yeah.
So what am I learning? If I'm not, what is it that I want to commit to start learning in order to help with my own mental health
Yeah.
um, progression, or helping myself get motivated and exercising that muscle?
Yeah. I think absolutely. And also since it sounds like most here are already very actively engaged in the learning process, right? You're a part of the school and the programs and such. I would also think about how you could leverage that opportunity that you have right now with these courses or trainings that you're doing as part of the school and the program to improve your mental health. So maybe it's really tuning in if you're, you know, to your learning opportunities in a way where you think about being as mindful as possible when you are learning, right? Because we know that that can help you feel calmer than if you're focused too in the future, to focused in the past. If you can be very present in your current learning opportunity, that can be helpful. If you can notice what thoughts are coming up as you are trying to learn something new. And are those thoughts helpful and encouraging for you and more what we think of like positive self-talk? Or are the thoughts that you're telling yourself very critical and very negative, that may reduce kind of your mental health? And how can you talk to yourself as you would almost a good friend or someone else who's
I love
trying to
that.
something new, right? So yes, I think absolutely I would hope everyone here could really come away from this thinking about how can they take advantage of the learning opportunities they have right now to improve their mental health just by tuning into what they're learning in a new way. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions? Because I only have one chat. I don't know if there is another chat box, that we have any questions. While we're waiting, and don't be shy, just go, what is, if anybody's struggling with mental health challenges right now, and they're wondering, would learning something new help me with A, B, C, or with what I'm going through? Or if you're having, being challenged because you want to learn something new, but you can, because it could be, either way, please feel free to share because, again, we're here to also learn from each other. While we're waiting and before we wrap up, what is one takeaway that you'd love our audience to remember?
Yeah. I think the key takeaway would be to pay attention more to the patterns, that are going on for you in terms of how you're thinking, how you're feeling, and what you do or what you don't do in any aspect of your life. Because as I said early on, we often don't actually observe that. We kind of get wrapped up into our thoughts are our reality. We have our ways of doing things, responding to emotions, the way and we, especially as maybe adults, we've been doing these patterns our whole life. And so I think I would hope to come away from this is to try to take a step back and be a little bit more of an observer of yourself, in what you're thinking, how you're doing, how you're responding to any emotions, and think about, is there anything that you could do a little differently, to promote, to have more helpful impact on your ability to learn or, to improve the mental health. So I think that first step is just noticing those patterns. Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you. I love that. Yeah, just being in, keeping yourself in the lane, see what are your patterns. I love that. There's a question, how does stress impact on learning?
Hmm. That's a great question. So, I wouldn't want, we're all going to experience some stress, and one important thing is to think about like our emotions are not bad necessarily. We evolve to have some anxiety because that may motivate us to take action, or prepare, study for a test or a presentation. So we don't really want to think about necessarily emotions as good or bad. So stress, and there's stressors, time constraints that we have, a lot of work, financial things, that those can impact, our ability to learn if we feel that the stressors in our life are taking up so much of our time or not creating an environment that's as conducive to learning as we would like. So that's certainly, I would hope, in any schools and programs, if there are any students who are struggling with kind of real, kind of what we consider toxic stress or stressors, of, finances, adequate food and things like that, how to get those basic needs met to allow an environment, to learn as best as possible. But in terms of other kind of just day-to-day stress, the stress of, an assignment or such, on one hand, it can sometimes help to motivate us. So I would channel, if you feel the stress, think of it as like, okay, this is motivating me to do what I need to do. And I'm going to try to channel that energy in a productive way. But I would encourage certainly thinking about stress management techniques. We know there's a lot that we can do, breathing exercises. So what happens in the body, if we feel stressed, we may start to breathe a little bit more shallow, and quicker. And that kind of gets our system, body ready to respond to a threat. We would want to calm, the body by taking slower and deeper breaths. And that can signal to the brain, that you're okay, because the brain can sometimes perceive things as threats, like an assignment or, a lot of work as a threat when it's not really there. And so you want to learn how to regulate your stress a little bit so that you can address what you need to address there. So I guess I know some more questions are coming in. Mhm.
Thank you. Um, what help? Can you recommend any specific mechanisms that will help with mental health or new learning?
Yeah. So, I guess to that point of what, I was just talking about a little bit, mechanisms, I guess, is specific to emotion kind of regulation. So if we are feeling, a lot of difficult emotions or stress and pressure, we may mentally not be able to or feel as able to focus, on what we're trying to learn, as best as possible. So there are a whole, there's a field of a lot of like stress management techniques, whether it is kind of deep breathing strategies, that mindfulness practice where you're building that muscle of being able to focus, a little bit more clearly on what you're learning. So I think those two kind of stress management techniques, often kind of like breathing and mindfulness practice, which can often help with focus and concentration, could be two important places to start.
Thank you. I'm going to go quickly through because now we're getting questions coming in. How can we remove the often self-imposed blocks that we're talking about? For example, I'm old or I'm not smart enough, right? That we place in our way to avoid action and hence achieving success. So that's again, we're kind of like reiterating what you're
Yeah.
mentioning.
Yeah. So exactly. So that's that cycle we had talked about before. And so the question is how to remove those blocks, I guess. So again, I'd come back to first just the awareness of it. What is going on for you? What are the thoughts or beliefs that you have about yourself that may not be serving you and being that block to learning something new? And what, I would do working as a psychologist or such, but you can all do this yourself. And if you're interested in learning more, there are some CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy strategies like cognitive reappraisal. There are apps and different things that can maybe help you create more what we call balanced thinking patterns. Because often what we know is we have, especially when we're feeling stressed or anxious or depressed, we tend to have what's called unhelpful thinking styles or patterns. So where we maybe have black and white thinking, we think like, I'm never going to be able to do this, or I'm a failure, or kind of like we think in these types of patterns that are not accurate and don't serve us. So the first is the awareness of what's going on for you. And then the second is to kind of create a more balanced self dialogue. And that can be hard to do. But as we say, and one of the creators from the CBT model, one question you could ask yourself that can be impactful is kind of, is there any other way to think about this situation? It's really trying to get you to open your mind to see, is there another perspective? I may be saying, oh, I'm too old, or I can't do this, I'm too busy. But is there another perspective that could say, I could, maybe I can do this. It will be hard. It will take some commitment and such, but I have been able to learn new things in the past and I could again. So it's just trying to create more of a flexible, way of talking to yourself rather than kind of that one lane where we don't really question what our brains are telling ourselves. Mhm.
Thank you. So then there's two, these are all like continue and relevant to one another. Someone here says, I will also like clarification of how age affects learning. I guess that's the key word here that I keep seeing. Does the ability to learn decrease as one get older?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'd have to say, I'm not an expert on that. Like in terms of the brain's ability to learn new material as we get, older. Um, I'd be interested from the field of neuroscience and such. So I have to say, I'm actually not sure of that. I think we do see practically that some it can be harder, at times to maybe learn new content, new material as we get older. But I think it depend on the individual in terms of what, the nature of that. So that be a question that I'm not 100% sure in terms of the science behind what we know about learning as we get older. Yeah.
So we have 3 more. I'm just mindful of time. What are some tools that we can use where someone says, I'm struggling to get stuff done, I postpone and
Mm,
eventually don't achieve my goals?
yeah. That's a great question. What we often talk about is goal setting. So, and really trying to think about doing, I'm not sure if anybody has heard of SMART goals, but really being, specific in terms of what your goals are, kind of manageable, achievable, and kind of time bound. So, what I would encourage you to do, is to think about, and sometimes it can be helpful to have an accountability partner, maybe another student, maybe a family member or such, to think about, okay, if I have, this long-term goal of whatever it is, how can you break that goal into smaller steps? So those are what we call kind of process goals too, or intermediate goals. And so think about not only what the final goal is, but what are the steps along the way to get there? How can you be very clear about when and how you are going to do those steps? So often it might be really planning if you use, a calendar or some other way to manage your time, really setting a specific time aside to do those steps along the way to get to that goal. And mapping it out that way, it may seem like it takes more time initially, but it will help you to make sure that you're making progress to the goal. So I think breaking it down into much smaller steps, and then kind of scheduling, really thinking ahead, of how you will get those steps done, given the demands you have in your life, when you will be able to do that or make time or work with your family or loved ones to protect time to get those steps done.
Thank you. Overthinking. Oh, that's a fun one. Sometimes overthinking, meaning tendency to lean too deeply into thoughts, can be detrimental and lead to mental health issues. What are your thoughts on that?
That is a great question. And that's a very true, and so sometimes we think of overthinking, clinically, it could be things like rumination, thinking about the same thing over and over again. Sometimes people may have obsessive or intrusive thoughts that they kind of come back to over and over again. So absolutely, sometimes it's helpful. And if we're working with anyone who maybe has a mental health condition that may make them more prone to overthinking or ruminating, we provide some psychoeducation on that might be a symptom, of, a condition that you have, so that you have a little bit more, again, a key here that I would want to be a takeaway: awareness of what's happening, noticing that, oh, I'm engaging in that pattern of overthinking. I'm thinking the same thought over and over, I'm cycling. So first, having the awareness of in the moment that you're doing that. Then we do have some different strategies, such as non-engagement responses. So if people are tending to kind of overthink too much, trying to have that awareness, and then use what's called a non-engagement response to say, okay, I hear those thoughts. I know they're not serving me, right now. I'm going to actively choose to not engage and think about, what am I doing in this present moment that I can turn my attention to that is helpful. That's hard to do, and especially depending on a mental health concern or such that might be come up, but that would be the practice of, one, the awareness of when you're engaging in unhelpful thinking, rumination, or strategies, and how to learn to unhook from those thoughts if they're not serving you. So that can be hard, but that is a practice, and would encourage, if anyone is really struggling with that, from a mental health perspective, to find, a therapist or someone else who can help you develop that practice of unhooking.
Thank you. And yeah, it's not an overnight thing. It's not like, okay, tonight we're gonna have this conversation with ourselves and tomorrow it's a
Exactly.
process. It takes time. So being
Yeah.
kind and patient with ourselves. really matters.
Exactly.
We have 10 more minutes, so we have three questions. Someone here says I was laid off last year, and being in my mid 40s, I took the bold step to start my own recruitment consultancy. Initially, I expected to take off immediately, but it's been a challenging journey. Despite the hurdles, I'm committed to pushing through and finding success in my work moving forward. I'm rooting for you. However, mental health has taken a toll, and I find myself on a mental teeter-totter and alone at times. So, how do we support that?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And, it's again, congratulations to do something, bold and takes courage to do. And it's good to hear. It sounds like you're committed to wanting to, work through it. It can be very isolating, and alone sometimes when you feel you're working towards something, on your own. I would think, in terms of how to support you. So one, I think thinking about, if you haven't already, trying to find a therapist or someone, a mental health person to help you manage, if the mental health has taken a toll, how to learn the skills and strategies to protect your mental health as you are pursuing your path. So I think one is really choosing to prioritize your mental health. It can be really hard to do when all of you, I'm sure, are so ambitious, and managing so much. It does take kind of time and a decision to prioritize the mental health. So I would encourage you to think about doing that, and working sometimes with a therapist or someone can help you set aside a time to make sure that you're taking care of your mental health needs and your self-care. And then the a piece of isolation, it's true. As we get older and we're pursuing our own, career paths and ambitions, it can feel lonely at times. And so I think there are a lot of peer support groups and services available. So maybe thinking about looking into if you can identify some peer through maybe its previous networks or this program to help serve as kind of an accountability buddy and kind of just a comfort. So reaching out again, sometimes when we're overwhelmed or we feel down or depressed, those emotions will make us want to withdraw more or isolate more, which doesn't serve us. So it's really thinking about how to reach out to connect with people and to prioritize kind of our mental health the way, we deserve to do. Mhm.
Thank you. How do you manage how do you manage can't-do-minded individuals in teams, even though they bring a different perspective of things to our strategy?
Oh, I think that's a great question, but I can't, was it how to manage can't?
How do you manage can't-do-minded? That's from David. Am I correct, David? I said, how do
Uh,
you manage cannot do minded individuals in teams, even though they bring different perspective of things to our strategy?
that's a great question. So saying kind of when working with a team, sometimes it could be hard. There's an individual who's maybe more negative or has that can't do mentality. And so that's a great question of how to manage, take what they are offering in terms of a different perspective, but not allow necessarily that individual from bringing down the whole group. I think the fact that you're even noticing that a difficult individual on a team can also bring some positives is great. You're saying, what can we learn from them? I think what you could try to do as a team leader is try to model, the type of mindset that you would want the team to have. So if it's instead of maybe only focusing on problems or negatives, maybe you can work with a team to really focus on, well, if we're going to recognize a difficulty, what's an alternative perspective? What's another solution? And trying to train everyone in the team to think solution oriented too by modeling that. If you're really feeling stuck, sometimes would encourage what we call kind of an assertive communication skill. So maybe you try to have a one-on-one conversation with that individual and say, I'm noticing describe kind of the facts of what you're seeing, expressing how you worry maybe some of the input might be impacting the group, and see, if that individual could change some of the way that they deliver their perspectives. So sometimes having a one-on-one conversation can be effective rather than, managing the whole group always at once.
Thank you. What's the impact of long-term use of antidepressant to the brain and memory?
That's a great question. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm a psychologist. I focus more on cognitive and behavioral strategies for mental health. I don't prescribe medications. So for that, you would want to ask, a psychiatrist or some other medical provider who prescribes those medications. What I will say, though, is we know that many antidepressants are very safe to take for long periods of time. So I don't know the science behind kind of impact long term on aging and memory and mental health. But I will say I know the safety data is very solid for their use over long periods of time.
Thank you. We have one more question because we have 4 more minutes.
Yeah.
Companies often go through seasons of change. What are your thoughts or suggestions, or how targeted training and learning interventions support teams through the stages of the change curve from resistance to commitment while also promoting mental health?
Mm. So that's a great question. I think long term, um, creating kind of these opportunities for in a team to check in, on how it's feeling with your members. So creating a space where it feels safe and comfortable to hear from everyone of how it's feeling, what are the concerns, and come up with potential solutions from the team themselves. So I think, regular open conversation and communication can be helpful. And I think certainly providing some resources, normalizing some discussion of mental health, I guess, and letting, if it's available, any resources that might be available to employees for mental health, just having that kind of a common message that supports are available. But yeah, I guess I'd say that. Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to reiterate that we hold this webinar because of Mental Health Awareness Month. However, it's not a today thing or this month thing. Mental health, it's very serious. It's something that we need to pay attention to. It doesn't matter how big or how small. I always use the example of, if you have a broken arm because you can see it, it's treated right away, taken to emergency or whatnot. But mental health part of it, well, there's a stigma. And then in addition to that, because you can't see it, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So again, I personally am very passionate about it. And I want to give a shout out to my brother, Dr. Edwin Raffi, that connected us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for accepting our invite. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. And thank you for being here. We will be sending the recording of this webinar. And again, thank you for being here. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day or night or evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Wonderful to meet you all.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.